The partition which separated my own office from our general outer office in the city was of thick plate glass. I could see through it what passed in the outer office, without hearing a word. I had it put up in place of a wall that had been there for years, ever since the house was built. It is no matter whether I did or did not make the change in order that I might derive my first impression of strangers, who came to us on business, from their faces alone, without being influenced by anything they said. Enough to mention that I turned my glass partition to that account, and that a life assurance office is at all times exposed to be practiced upon by the most crafty and cruel of the human race. It was through my glass partition that I first saw the gentleman whose story I am going to tell. He had come in without my observing it, and had put his hat and umbrella on the broad counter, and was bending over it to take some papers from one of the clerks. He was about 40 or so, dark, exceedingly well dressed in black, being in mourning, and the hand he extended with a polite air had a particularly well-fitting black kid glove upon it. His hair, which was elaborately brushed and oiled, was parted straight up the middle, and he presented this parting to the clerk, exactly, to my thinking, as if he had said, in so many words, "You must take me, if you please, my friend, just as I show myself. Come straight up here, follow the gravel path, keep off the grass, I allow no trespassing." I conceived a very great aversion to that man the moment I thus saw him. He had asked for some of our printed forms, and the clerk was giving them to him and explaining them. An obliged and agreeable smile was on his face, and his eyes met those of the clerk with a sprightly look. I have known a vast quantity of nonsense talked about bad men not looking you in the face. Don't trust that conventional idea. Dishonesty will stare honesty out of countenance, any day in the week, if there is anything to be got by it. I saw, in the corner of his eyelash, that he became aware of my looking at him. Immediately he turned the parting in his hair toward the glass partition, as if he said to me with a sweet smile, "Straight up here, if you please. Off the grass." In a few moments he had put on his hat and taken up his umbrella, and was gone. I beckoned the clerk into my room, and asked, "Who was that?" He had the gentleman's card in his hand. Mr. Julius Slinkton, Middle Temple. A barrister, Mr. Adams? I think not, sir. I should have thought him a clergyman, but for his having no reverend here, said I. Probably, from his appearance, Mr. Adams replied, he is reading for orders. I should mention that he wore a dainty white cravat, and dainty linen altogether. What did he want, Mr. Adams? Merely a form of proposal, sir, and form of reference. Recommended here? Did he say? Yes, he said he was recommended here by a friend of yours. He noticed you, but said that as he had not the pleasure of your personal acquaintance he would not trouble you. Did he know my name? Oh yes, sir. He said, "There is Mr. Sampson, I see." A well-spoken gentleman, apparently? Remarkably so, sir. Insinuating manners, apparently? Very much so, indeed, sir. Ha, said I want nothing at present, Mr. Adams. Within a fortnight of that day I went to dine with a friend of mine, a merchant, a man of taste, who buys pictures and books, and the first man I saw among the company was Mr. Julius Slinkton. There he was, standing before the fire, with good large eyes and an open expression of face, but still, I thought, requiring everybody to come at him by the prepared way he offered, and by no other. I noticed him ask my friend to introduce him to Mr. Sampson, and my friend did so. Mr. Slinkton was very happy to see me. Not too happy, there was no overdoing of the matter, happy in a thoroughly well-bred, perfectly unmeaning way. I thought you had met, our host observed. No, said Mr. Slinkton. I did look in at Mr. Sampson's office, on your recommendation, but I really did not feel justified in troubling Mr. Sampson himself, on a point in the everyday routine of an ordinary clerk. I said I should have been glad to show him any attention on our friend's introduction. I am sure of that, said he, and am much obliged. At another time, perhaps, I may be less delicate. Only, however, if I have real business, for I know, Mr. Sampson, how precious business time is, and what a vast number of impertinent people there are in the world. I acknowledged his consideration with a slight bow. You were thinking, said I, of effecting a policy on your life. Oh dear no. I am afraid I am not so prudent as you pay me the compliment of supposing me to be, Mr. Sampson. I merely inquired for a friend. But you know what friends are in such matters. Nothing may ever come of it. I have the greatest reluctance to trouble men of business with inquiries for friends, knowing the probabilities to be 1,000 to 1 that the friends will never follow them up. People are so fickle, so selfish, so inconsiderate. Don't you, in your business, find them so every day, Mr. Sampson? I was going to give a qualified answer, but he turned his smooth, white parting on me with its straight up here, if you please, and I answered yes. I hear, Mr. Sampson, he resumed presently, for our friend had a new cook, and dinner was not so punctual as usual, that your profession has recently suffered a great loss. In money, said I. He laughed at my ready association of loss with money, and replied, no, in talent and vigor. Not at once following out his allusion, I considered for a moment. Has it sustained a loss of that kind? Said I was not aware of it. Understand me, Mr. Sampson. I don't imagine that you have retired. It is not so bad as that. But Mr. Meltham. Oh, to be sure, said I, yes. Mr. Meltham, the young actuary of the inestimable. Just so, he returned in a consoling way. He is a great loss. He was at once the most profound, the most original, and the most energetic man I have ever known connected with life assurance. I spoke strongly, for I had a high esteem and admiration for Meltham, and my gentleman had indefinitely conveyed to me some suspicion that he wanted to sneer at him. He recalled me to my guard by presenting the trim pathway up his head, with its internal not on the grass, if you please, the gravel. You knew him, Mr. Slinkton? Only by reputation. To have known him as an acquaintance or as a friend, is an honor I should have sought if he had remained in society, though I might never have had the good fortune to attain it, being a man of far inferior mark. He was scarcely above 30, I suppose? About 30. Ah, he sighed in his former consoling way. What creatures we are! To break up, Mr. Sampson, and become incapable of business at that time of life, any reason assigned for the melancholy fact? Humph, thought I, as I looked at him. But I won't go up the track, and I will go on the grass. What reason have you heard assigned, Mr. Slinkton? I asked, point blank. Most likely a false one. You know what rumor is, Mr. Sampson. I never repeat what I hear, it is the only way of paring the nails and shaving the head of rumor. But when you ask me what reason I have heard assigned for Mr. Meltham's passing away from among men, it is another thing. I am not gratifying idle gossip then. I was told, Mr. Sampson, that Mr. Meltham had relinquished all his avocations and all his prospects, because he was, in fact, broken-hearted. A disappointed attachment, I heard, though it hardly seems probable, in the case of a man so distinguished and so attractive. Attractions and distinctions are no armor against death, said I. "Oh, she died? Pray pardon me. I did not hear that. That, indeed, makes it very, very sad. Poor Mr. Meltham. She died? Ah, dear me. Lamentable, lamentable." I still thought his pity was not quite genuine, and I still suspected an unaccountable sneer under all this, until he said, as we were parted, like the other knots of talkers, by the announcement of dinner. "Mr. Sampson, you are surprised to see me so moved on behalf of a man whom I have never known. I am not so disinterested as you may suppose. I have suffered, and recently too, from death myself. I have lost one of two charming nieces, who were my constant companions. She died young, barely 23, and even her remaining sister is far from strong. The world is a grave." He said this with deep feeling, and I felt reproached for the coldness of my manner. Coldness and distrust had been engendered in me, I knew, by my bad experiences. They were not natural to me, and I often thought how much I had lost in life, losing trustfulness, and how little I had gained, gaining hard caution. This state of mind being habitual to me, I troubled myself more about this conversation than I might have troubled myself about a greater matter. I listened to his talk at dinner, and observed how readily other men responded to it, and with what a graceful instinct he adapted his subjects to the knowledge and habits of those he talked with. As, in talking with me, he had easily started the subject I might be supposed to understand best, and to be the most interested in, so, in talking with others, he guided himself by the same rule. The company was of a varied character, but he was not at fault, that I could discover, with any member of it. He knew just as much of each man's pursuit as made him agreeable to that man in reference to it, and just as little as made it natural in him to seek modestly for information when the theme was broached. As he talked and talked, but really not too much, for the rest of us seemed to force it upon him, I became quite angry with myself. I took his face to pieces in my mind, like a watch, and examined it in detail. I could not say much against any of his features separately. I could say even less against them when they were put together. Then is it not monstrous, I asked myself, that because a man happens to part his hair straight up the middle of his head, I should permit myself to suspect, and even to detest him? I may stop to remark that this was no proof of my sense. An observer of men who finds himself steadily repelled by some apparently trifling thing in a stranger is right to give it great weight. It may be the clue to the whole mystery. A hair or two will show where a lion is hidden. A very little key will open a very heavy door. I took my part in the conversation with him after a time, and we got on remarkably well. In the drawing-room I asked the host how long he had known Mr. Slinkton. He answered, not many months. He had met him at the house of a celebrated painter then present, who had known him well when he was traveling with his nieces in Italy for their health. His plans in life being broken by the death of one of them, he was reading with the intention of going back to college as a matter of form, taking his degree, and going into orders. I could not but argue with myself that here was the true explanation of his interest in poor Meltham, and that I had been almost brutal in my distrust on that simple head.